The first memory I have is of cold. Biting, relentless cold that would have killed a lesser being. But I wasn't lesser, was I? No, I was forged in that ice and steel, born into a world that wanted me dead from the first breath. They tell me I came from the stars, crashed into the side of a mountain in a metal egg. Sounds like the kind of thing skalds sing about after too much mjod, if you ask me. All I know is I survived, and that's all that's ever mattered on Fenris. My first family wasn't human. It was a she-wolf, fiercer than any warrior I've met since. She found me, this squalling, hairless pup, and instead of tearing out my throat, she decided to raise me as her own. I suckled alongside her cubs, learned to hunt on all fours, to use my teeth and nails as weapons. For years, that was my life. Simple, brutal, free, until the day the humans came. It was the dead of Hellwinter, and they were desperate for food. We were desperate to survive. The slaughter that followed. Well, let's just say it's a wonder any of us walked away. My wolf mother died there, defending her brood to the last. Most of my brothers and sisters fell too. I fought like the animal they thought I was, tearing through their ranks with nothing but rage and instinct. It wasn't until I locked eyes with one of them, a grizzled old man who'd probably seen too much to be shocked by a feral child, that the killing stopped. They dragged me before their king, Thengir. I remember standing there, covered in blood, some mine, most not, with Freki and Jerry, my last remaining packmates, growling at my sides. I expected to die there, in that smoky hall full of gawking humans. But old Thengir, he just laughed like he'd been told the best joke in all the realms, and then he said something I'll never forget. By the winter's teeth, boys, looks like we've found ourselves a wolf in man's skin. Might as well keep him. Learning to be human wasn't as hard as you might think. After all, I'd already mastered being a wolf. How much trickier could it be to walk on 2 legs instead of 4? Turns out not much. The tongue of men came to me as easy as breathing. Before long, I was spinning yarns with the best of them, my voice carrying over the mead hall like I'd been born there. Old Thengir, he seemed pleased as punch. Gave me a name, Leman of the Russ. Suppose every dog needs a collar, even one that used to run wild. Fighting, though? That was where I truly shone. I remember my 3rd bout with the king's champion. He thought he'd teach the wolf boy a lesson. Instead, I had his axes in my hands before he knew what hit him. As the years passed, I grew. In size, in strength, in skill. Iron sang in my hands, whether axe or sword. No man could stand against me. No battle could defeat me. I became more than just a warrior. I became a leader. Men would follow me into the maws of death itself, and I'd bring them out the other side, bloodied but victorious. Yet for all that I embraced about this new life, for all the laughter and songs and glory, there was always something different about me. I wasn't just a man who'd been raised by wolves. I was something more. Better than both man and beast, in ways I couldn't quite explain. When Thengir breathed his last, it was me they turned to, me they named king. And under my rule, we conquered, we bled, we triumphed. My name became legend across Fenris, whispered in awe around fires on the darkest nights. Little did I know, those whispers were carrying further than I could have imagined, across the stars themselves, to the ears of a being who'd been searching for something lost, for someone lost. And then, in the 819th year of the 30th millennium by their reckoning, destiny came knocking. Or rather, it came thundering down from the skies in ships so vast they blotted out the sun. I'd united all of Fenris by then. Every tribe, every clan bent the knee or felt the bite of my axe. Even the wolves, my first kin, knew to howl my name with respect. Men and beasts alike walked side by side in my halls. A miracle, some called it. I called it common sense. It was barely a few years after I'd knocked the last stubborn heads together and called Fenris truly mine when they arrived. Ships bigger than mountains, wreathed in fire and thunder. They settled on our world like gods descending from on high. And from those ships came a man. No, not a man. A being. Something more. Something familiar. As he strode towards my hall, golden light seeming to bend around him, I felt something I hadn't known since I was a pup. Fear. Not of death or defeat. I'd long since conquered those mortal concerns. No, this was the fear of meeting your destiny face to face and realizing that everything, every battle, every victory, every moment that made you who you are, was just prologue. The Emperor, they called him, Master of mankind, and he'd come looking for me. Well, I thought, straightening my furs and gripping my axe tight, let's give him, whoever he is, a proper Fenrisian welcome, shall we? Wrapped in a plain robe, he strode into my hall like some wandering skald. But there was nothing plain about him. Even with whatever tricks he was using to hide himself, I could feel the power rolling off him in waves. My wolves, beasts that would tear apart a full-grown man without breaking a sweat. They whimpered and backed away. The sharper ones among my warriors, those not too deep in their cups, they felt it too. A stillness fell over the hall. Now, I've never been one to kneel, not to man, not to beast, and certainly not to some stranger waltzing into my home, no matter how powerful he might be. When he claimed to be the master of mankind, I laughed in his face. Who was he to demand my loyalty, my subservience? But he just smiled, like he knew something I didn't, like this was all going according to some grand plan of his. I could see it in his eyes. He'd come ready for a fight. Not with swords or axes, mind you. No, this was to be a battle of wills. He knew I wouldn't roll over for him. Knew I'd demand proof of his worth. And you know what? He welcomed it. Standing there in the middle of my hall, surrounded by my fiercest warriors and wildest beasts, he looked eager, like a man finally facing a challenge after years of easy victories. One thing was clear. This wasn't going to end with words. No, this was Fenris. Here you prove your worth with blood and steel and pain. I bared my teeth in what might have been a grin or a snarl. Well then, master of mankind, I growled, shall we dance? A dance indeed, the wanderer said, his voice carrying over the hall like thunder. But let's make it interesting, shall we? Now that caught my attention. I leaned forward on my throne, the bones adorning it creaking under my weight. Speak your piece, wanderer. A simple wager, he said, all casual-like, as if we were discussing the weather. If I win, I ask only to drink at your right hand during this fine feast. I couldn't help but laugh. The balls on this one. And if you lose, I asked, already knowing I'd make him regret his boldness. "Then I'll serve at your command for a year and a day." The hall went quiet as a tomb. My warriors looked to me, waiting to see how I'd respond to such audacity. I grinned, wide and wolfish. "Done and done, stranger. Now let's see what you're made of." First up, eating. Didn't want to interrupt the feast, after all. Might as well make it part of the challenge. The stranger, he put on a good show, ate more than most of my battle-hardened warriors could stomach. But when he finished, looking right pleased with himself, he found me lounging back, belching contentedly, the bones of 3 whole aurochs piled at my feet. "Not bad," I said, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "For a start." You should have seen the look on his face. Shock, disbelief, and something else. Something that looked an awful lot like excitement? "Round 2, I announced, gesturing to the barrels lining the walls. "Let's see how you hold your drink, stranger." Now, Fenrisian mead isn't for the faint of heart. It's been known to fell giants and drive women mad. But this one, he knocked back barrel after barrel like it was mother's milk. 6 full barrels he drained, and still he stood. Impressive, most impressive, but not enough. By the time he finished his 6th, I'd emptied the last drop from the hall's entire supply. My beard was soaked, my belly was full, and victory was mine. Again. The stranger's eyes flashed then, anger. But there was something else there too, something that sent a shiver down my spine, though I'd never admit it. Power, raw and barely contained. As he stood there, swaying slightly, whether from the mead or from holding back whatever storm was brewing inside him, I couldn't say, I realized something. This was no ordinary man, no mere traveler who'd wandered into my hall looking for glory. This was something else entirely, and our little game, it was far from over. I rose from my throne, towering over him. "Well, stranger," I said, my voice a low growl, "ready for round 3? The bastard didn't even hesitate. He looked me dead in the eye and spat words that would have gotten a lesser man killed on the spot. "You call yourself a king?" he sneered. "I see nothing but a glutton and a drunkard, capable only of stuffing his face and drowning in ale. Your boasts are as empty as your hall's barrels." The court went quiet as a grave. You could have heard a snowflake hit the ground. My warriors tensed, hands on their weapons, ready for the bloodbath they were sure was coming. But me? I just smiled. "Calm as you please." "Fine words," my voice cutting through the silence. "Let's see if you can back them up." I stepped up onto the long table, scattering plates and goblets. My sword rasped from its sheath, the sound like death's whisper in that silent hall. "You and me, stranger! Right here, right now!" And that's when everything changed. The stranger stood up straight, suddenly taller than any man I'd ever seen. His cloak fell away, revealing golden armor that shone like the sun. Power radiated off him in waves, making the very air crackle. The Emperor of Mankind, in my goddamn hall. What happened next? Well, it's all a bit of a blur. We fought, that much I remember. His fist encased in some kind of power glove connected with my jaw. And then, darkness. I came to about an hour later, sprawled on the floor like some drunk after a tavern brawl. My head was pounding worse than any hangover, and I could taste blood in my mouth. Felt a gap where one of my fangs used to be. But you know what? I was grinning. A bloodied, broken grin, but a grin all the same. Because in that moment, looking up at the golden giant who'd bested me, I knew. This was no mere man. This was my father, my emperor. Well, I managed to croak out, spitting blood onto the floor. Took you long enough to find me, old man. And just like that, I swore my loyalty. Not because he'd beaten me, though that certainly helped, but because in that moment, I saw what he truly was, what I could be, what we could build together. The old man, my father, the emperor, he didn't waste any time. Before I could even nurse my wounded pride and my throbbing jaw, I was whisked off Fenris. Time to learn, he said. Time to see what this imperium of his was all about. Now, I've always been a quick study. You don't survive Fenris by being slow on the uptake. But this was different. Mind-bending technology. Tactics that'd make our greatest warriors look like pups play fighting. Weeks. That's all it took. Weeks. And the old man decided I was ready to lead armies. Not just any armies, mind you. Armies that'd make the greatest Fenrisian warband look like a bunch of lost wanderers. That's when I met them. The 6th Legion. My sons, if you can believe it. Turns out, while I was running wild on Fenris, the Emperor had been busy. These warriors, they had a bit of me in them. My blood, my strength, my fury. The Space Wolves, they called themselves. Fitting, I thought. And me, I was their father, their lord, their alpha. They kitted me out proper, too. Armor that makes our finest mail look like paper. And a sword. Oh, what a sword. Mjolnir, they named it. Forged with the teeth of Gormenjarl itself, the great kraken of Fenris. They say it could split our ice mountains. I say it could split the stars themselves. And then we were off. To the Great Crusade. Great? Hell, that's an understatement if I ever heard one. We were at the forefront, my wolves and I. Always first into the fray, last to leave. The howl of my sons became the last sound many a foe would hear. I led from the front, Mjolnir singing its deadly song as I carved through enemies like a hot knife through blubber. But not all sagas end in glory. Some end in blood and madness, like the tale of Genna. Hell's Teeth, what a mess that was. A whole world's worth of corpses piled high in a single night. The World Eaters, they called themselves. Fitting name, that. They'd made a meal of Genna, sure enough. The Emperor wasn't pleased. Can't say I blamed him. Told them to quit using those blasted implants of theirs. Butcher's nails, they called them. Fitting name for those too, I suppose. Word was, some of our brother Primarchs had tried talking sense into Angron before. First right after they'd dragged him kicking and screaming from Nuceria. Then again about 100 years later. None of it made a lick of difference. Angron just being Angron. Full of charm, that one. Then came the Night of the Wolf. Although to me it was just another mess I had to clean up. The old man sent us in saying, "Bring the World Eaters to heel." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one staring down a legion of blood-mad butchers. We found them at Malkoia, beyond the dead city that shared its name, and by Fenris, what a sight they were. The World Eaters, fresh from their slaughter on Genna, looking like they'd been chewed up and spat out by Morkai himself, blood-caked, twitching, barely holding their lines. And us? We stood across from them, my wolves and I, disciplined, controlled, everything they weren't. The air stank of blood and madness. You could taste the violence waiting to erupt. 2 legions forged for war, standing on the edge of a blade. I looked at those World Eaters, saw the metal glinting in their skulls, the madness in their eyes. And for the first time since I'd left Fenris, I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't going to end well. Not for them, not for us, not for anyone. But orders were orders. And if there's one thing Leman Russ knows how to do, it's follow the Emperor's will, even if it means putting down your own mad dogs. Angron, pardon me, but he was a mess. Covered in blood and wounds, fresh from his butchery on Genna. In his hands that monstrous axe of his Widowmaker. Little did I know it'd be the last time that cursed blade would taste blood. I stood there in my battle plate, polished and gleaming like the storm-tossed seas of Fenris. Krakenmaw hungered in my grip, its chain teeth itching for a fight. Teeth from a beast of legend, ready to sink into the flesh of a monster made real. "Fuck off, wolf," Angron snarled, his words like daggers. I didn't even blink. "Not happening, brother," the word brother tasting like rotting meat in my mouth. "I've got orders, and by the Allfather, you're going to hear them." And so I laid it out for him. No more of those blasted implants. No more butchering worlds that should be brought into the Imperial fold. And they were coming with us, back to Terra, to get those damn nails out of their thick skulls. If looks could kill, I'd have been nothing but a smear on the blood-soaked ground. "That all, puppy?" Angron growled, his grip tightening on Widowmaker. I could smell the bloodlust rising from him and his legion. My own boys tensed behind me. This was it, 2 legions, about to tear each other apart. You know what's funny? Both our legions swear up and down it was the other side that kicked it off. Me? I didn't give the order. Far as I know, neither did Angron. But there we were, tearing into each other like we were born for it. And maybe we were. The official records, they call it the Genna Scouring. Nice and neat. Doesn't mention how we damn near wiped each other out. Doesn't talk about how the field ran red with the blood of 2 legions, brothers killing brothers. Both sides claimed victory when the dust settled. We were all too afraid to admit we'd lost. Lost what? Everything. Our honor, our purpose, our brotherhood. In truth, there was no victor that day, just a field of corpses and a stench of shame that no amount of glory could ever wash away. And Angron? He didn't come to heal, didn't come back to Terra, kept right on shoving those blasted nails into his son's skulls. I'd failed. Failed the Emperor. Failed the Imperium. Failed my own brothers. But life goes on. The Great Crusade continued, a grand bloody march across the stars. We brought world after world to heal, my wolves and I. Thousands of planets, billions of souls, all bowing to the Emperor's will. Or dying if they didn't. One by one, my brothers were found. 20 Primarchs, each with their own legion, ready to carve up the galaxy in the Emperor's name. A family reunion written in blood and fire. Should have been a time of glory, of triumph. It was Horus who threw it all away. The Golden Boy, the War Master, my father's favorite. One day, Horus is leading us to victory after victory. The next, he is selling his soul to forces that'd make the nightmares of Fenris look like cute puppies. Legions that had fought side by side for centuries now tore into each other like rabid wolves. We were caught in the middle of it all, trying to figure out which way was up while the galaxy burned around us. Horus, he played us all, used every trick in the book, lies, manipulation, corruption. Before we knew it, half the legions had thrown in with him. Some knew what they were getting into. Others? They just followed their Primarch. only realizing too late that they'd sided with madness incarnate. And Horus himself? He had left his humanity behind and transformed into a vessel for powers that'd make your soul shrivel just to look at them. We called it the Horus heresy. It was the end of everything we'd fought for, everything we'd bled for. As I watched it all unfold, I couldn't help but think back to that day on Malkoia. The day when brother first raised hand against brother. Was that where it all started to go wrong? Or was it just the first crack in a foundation that was rotten from the start? Doesn't matter now, I suppose. The die was cast. The galaxy was at war. And me? I was right in the thick of it, as always. Ready to rip and tear and kill. That is what the Emperor's executioner does, even when the ones you're executing used to be family. Speaking of family, I would like to tell you about my brother Magnus. The Red One, the Cyclops, the damned fool. He is a giant of a man, skin like burnished copper, hair like a forest fire, and that eye, that single accursed eye that peers right into your soul. The other, lost to his blasted sorcery, but he didn't seem to care. Now, I won't lie. Magnus was strong, might have even given me a run for my money in a fair fight. But fighting fair wasn't his style. No, Magnus preferred to stick his nose in dusty old tomes and dabble in powers no man should touch. Sorcery, warp magic. Call it what you will, it's all the same to me. Dishonorable, unclean, the kind of thing that'll bite you in the ass faster than a Fenrisian wolf. But did the Emperor listen when I warned him? Of course not. Our father, the most powerful psyker in the galaxy, saw nothing wrong with Magnus playing with fire. Figured the boy could handle it. Shows what he knew. When everything went to hell, Magnus tried to play the hero. Sent some fancy psychic message to warn the Emperor about Horus turning traitor. Noble intention, I'll give him that. But you know what they say about good intentions and the road to damnation? That message of his? It tore right through the Emperor's wards around the Imperial Palace. Turns out there was some secret project involving the Eldar Webway going on. And Magnus, in his great wisdom, just let every demon and its mother waltz right in. Oops! The Emperor was furious. Here we had Magnus, breaking every rule laid down at Nicaea, risking Terra itself. And for what? A warning that sounded more like the ravings of a madman than anything else. In that moment, I saw it in the Emperor's eyes. He thought Magnus had fallen. Thought it was the Cyclops, not Horus, who'd turned to chaos. And you know what? Part of me wasn't even surprised. I'd always known no good would come from messing with the warp. Always known Magnus would be the one to prove me right. The Emperor's words still rang in my ears. Bring Magnus to Terra. Simple enough, right? If only anything in this cursed galaxy were ever that simple. Prospero. Magnus's little sanctuary of sorcerers and bookworms, a place that reeked of forbidden knowledge and barely contained power. It made my skin crawl just thinking about it. But orders were orders until they weren't. Horus, that silver-tongued bastard, he got to me, played me like a damn fool. The Emperor's changed his mind, he said. Prospero needs to burn. Magnus needs to die. So we came. Not just my wolves, but the Silent Sisters and half the Imperial army. We came to Prospero like the end times themselves. The City of Light, they called their capital. Hell, it sure burned bright when we were done with it. It was a slaughter, plain and simple. For all their fancy powers and book learning, the 1,000 Suns couldn't stand against our fury. And Magnus, oh brother, you should have seen him. eyes blazing with power, his body wreathed in warp energy. He fought like a cornered beast, throwing everything he had at us. But in the end, it wasn't enough. I can still feel his spine snapping over my knee, can still hear his scream of pain and betrayal. In that moment, I thought it was over. Thought I'd done my duty. Should have known better. Magnus had called out to his new masters in the warp, and just like that, he was gone. Him and what was left of his sons, swallowed up by a tear in reality itself. We'd won, but by Fenris, at what cost? As I stood there, watching Prospero burn, I couldn't help but wonder, was this justice? Or just another step towards damnation? One thing was certain, the galaxy would never be the same. The wounds we'd opened here, they'd never truly heal. I'd done my duty, been the Emperor's executioner once again, but as I looked at the blood on my hands, my brother's blood, I had to ask myself, at what point does the executioner become just another murderer? Turns out I didn't have much time to ponder that particular nugget of wisdom. No sooner had the ashes of Prospero cooled than we found ourselves neck-deep in another bloodbath. The Alax's Nebula seemed like a good place to lick our wounds, regroup. Shows what I know. It was a trap, and we walked right into it like newborn pups. The Alpha Legion. Those sneaky, two-faced bastards, always skulking in the shadows, playing their games of lies and deception. I'd called them out on their dishonorable tactics before, and now they were here to settle the score. They hit us hard, hit us fast. My wolves, already bloodied from Prospero, found themselves fighting for their very survival. In that moment, surrounded by enemies, outgunned and outmaneuvered, I did something I never thought I'd do. I asked for help. Jaghatai Khan, the great Khan of Chogoris. I sent out a call, practically begging him to come to our aid. His response? Let's just say it wasn't what I was hoping for. Sorry, brother, he said in not so many words. Can't tell who's friend or foe these days. You're on your own. We were abandoned, left to face the Alpha Legion's onslaught with nothing but our own strength and fury. I watched my sons die around me, yet I couldn't help but laugh. It was a bitter, mirthless sound that echoed through the void of space. This is what it had come to. Brother turning on brother. Friends becoming enemies, and those who should stand with you, they just stand aside and watch. In that moment, I realized something I should have seen long ago. It chilled me to my very core. The Imperium was already lost, not to Horus, not to chaos, but to doubt, to fear, to the poison of mistrust that had seeped into our very bones. We were tearing ourselves apart, and the real enemy? They were just sitting back and enjoying the show. As I readied myself for what might be our final battle, I made a vow to myself, to my sons, even to the Emperor himself. We would survive this. We would endure. And when the dust settled, when the blades stopped singing and the bolters fell silent, we would remember. Remember who stood with us, who stood against us, and who just stood by and watched. As the Alpha Legion closed in, tightening their noose around our throats, I felt something I hadn't felt since, never. Doubt. What had I become?
An executioner's axe. A monster. The Emperor's attack dog let off the leash to maul his own brothers. I couldn't face it, couldn't face my sons. So I did what any self-respecting wolf does when it's wounded. I retreated to lick my wounds, locked myself away in my chambers, leaving Gunnar Gunhilt to command from the Ragnarok. Poor bastard. Trying to outmaneuver the Alpha Legion is like trying to outdrink a Fenrisian ale barrel. You're doomed before you even start. It was Bjorn who finally got through to me. Bjorn the One-Handed, they call him now. Back then he was just a pup himself, but with a wisdom beyond his years. He didn't mince words, told me straight how my role as the Emperor's executioner was tearing the Vulca Fenrica apart. How we were becoming the very monsters we were supposed to hunt. His words cut me deeper than any blade, but they were the truth I needed to hear. Outside, the void was alight with the fires of battle. Gunhilt was trying to punch a hole through the Alpha Legion's net, but it was like trying to headbutt your way through a mountain. And then it got worse. They came for us, elite Cataphractii Terminators, right on the bridge of the Hrafnkel, and leading them? A warrior I'd have bet my last fang was Alfarius himself. He fought like a demon, all lightning strikes and fluid grace. For a moment, I thought this might be it. The end of the Wolf King, gutted on his own bridge. But then, salvation. From the most unexpected quarter, the Dark Angels, our brooding, secretive cousins, led by that flying fortress of theirs, the Chimera. I've never been so glad to see those grim bastards in all my life. The Alpha Legion, caught between the hammer of the Dark Angels and the anvil of my wolves, had no choice but to cut and run. As I watched them flee, tails between their legs, I couldn't help but laugh. A real laugh this time, born of relief and a touch of madness. We'd survived, beaten the odds, spat in the eye of fate itself. But as the adrenaline faded, as the blood haze cleared, I was left with a sobering thought. This wasn't just about loyalty anymore. It was about survival, about finding allies in the most unexpected places, and about facing that deep, dark hole within ourselves. As I looked out at the stars, at the retreating forms of our unlikely saviors, I knew one thing for certain. The old Imperium was dead, and what would rise from its ashes? Only the Allfather knew. But whatever came next, the Vulca Fenrica would face it, together, as a pack, because that's what wolves do. We endure, we survive, and we never, ever forget. The dust had barely settled, the void still echoing with the death screams of ships and men, when I called for a meeting with our dark-winged saviors. Chapter Master Althalos looked about as cheery as a Fenrisian winter. What he told us, well, it was like being dunked in ice water after a fever dream. 59 years. That's how long these bastards had been out here, conquering worlds in the name of some regent back on Caliban. 59 years, and they didn't have a clue about the storm that had engulfed the galaxy. I almost envied them for their ignorance. But ignorance, like all things, comes with a price. They'd been fumbling in the dark, trying to make sense of garbled messages and half-truths. Hell, for all they knew, we could have been the traitors. Turns out we had an uninvited guest during our little scrap with the Alpha Legion. Some Dark Angels captain named Ormand, sneaking around my ship like a rat in the walls.
My rune priest Kavar sniffed him out, dragged him before me. Lucky for him, he liked what he saw. Us fighting tooth and nail against Horus's lapdogs. Must have been quite a show. So there we were, two packs of warriors who'd been dancing to different tunes, suddenly finding ourselves on the same blood-soaked stage. They wanted answers. By the All-Father, so did I. I told them everything. Horus's betrayal. The galaxy torn apart. Brother turning against brother. Watched the light die in Althalos's eyes as he realized the true scale of our fuck-up. Poor thing. He'd have to go back to Caliban now, see what rot had taken hold there in his absence. As for me and my wolves, our path was clear. Terra, the Emperor, the final dance with my traitorous brother Horus. The Dark Angels offered us men, ships, supplies, generous of them, or maybe they just wanted to share in the glory or the damnation. As I watched Althalos's fleet prepare to depart, I couldn't help but wonder, how many more lost souls were out there? How many warriors fighting for a cause that no longer existed, for masters who'd long since fallen? This war, this heresy, it wasn't just tearing the Imperium apart. It was rewriting the very fabric of reality, and we, the Emperor's finest, were nothing but pawns in a game too vast for us to comprehend. But we'd play our part. We'd dance our dance, because that's what we were made for. As I gave the order to set course for Terra, I felt the weight of destiny settling on my shoulders. The final act was approaching, and by Fenris, we'd make it one for the sagas. Win or lose, live or die, we'd face it as we always had, as wolves, as warriors, as brothers. And if the galaxy burns, we'd be there to piss on the ashes. Except we weren't, not when it mattered most. We raced across the void, my wolves and I, fangs bared and claws sharp, ready to tear Horus and his traitor dogs to pieces. The Ultramarines, those blue-armored bookkeepers, kept pace beside us. For once, I was glad for their company. But it wasn't enough. We weren't fast enough. We weren't there when it mattered. By the time we broke through to Terra's orbit, it was already over. The air stank of ozone and blood, the void filled with the cooling corpses of ships and men. And above it all, that cursed ship, the vengeful spirit, Horus's lair. We were too late, too fucking late. Horus lay dead, they told us. Good riddance to bad rubbish, I thought. But the cost. Oh, the cost. Sanguinius, that perfect son, struck down by Horus's hand. I'd never much cared for his highborn heirs, but in that moment, I howled for him. A brother lost, another light snuffed out in this galaxy of darkness. And the Emperor, by Fenris, the Emperor. They wouldn't let us see him at first. Rogel Dawn, that stone-faced bastard, he took charge, spirited our father away to that cursed golden throne. When I finally laid eyes on what was left of him, it was like looking at a corpse that somehow still drew breath. I wanted to rage, to howl, to tear the very stars from the sky. But what good would it do? We'd won, hadn't we? Horus was dead. The traitors were in retreat. The Imperium stood, bloodied but unbowed. So why did it feel like we'd lost everything? We were left to clean up this mess. They called it the Scouring, hunting down every last trace of chaos, purging entire worlds, but that wasn't enough for some. No, Robute Gilliman, he had to go and write his damn book. The Codex Astartes, a nice, neat little manual on how to neuter the Space Marines. "Break up the legions," he said. "Divide our strength," as if that would stop another Horus from rising, as if battlefield prowess could be distilled into a set of rules and regulations. The other legions fell in line, like good little soldiers, became chapters, whatever in hell that means. First founding, second founding. Might as well call them first neutering, second neutering. But not us. Not the Vulca Fenrica. I looked Gilliman right in his perfect face and told him where he could shove his codex. We are warriors of Fenris, sons of Russ. Our strength lies in our pack, in our brotherhood. You don't split up a wolf pack and expect it to survive. Oh, we made a show of it, created the Wolf Brothers, gave them our blessing. Didn't last long. Just goes to show you can't replicate perfection. We kept our great companies, 12 of them, each led by a wolf lord, each 100 strong. Let the other legions play by Gilliman's rules. We'll keep to the old ways, the ways of Fenris, the ways of Russ. They say we're too big, too powerful, that we're a threat. Let them talk. Let them fear. A wolf doesn't concern itself with the opinions of sheep. We are the Emperor's executioners, his wolves, his vengeance. And no book, no matter how cleverly written, will change that. The galaxies changed. The Imperium's changed. But we haven't. We won't. When the night is darkest and the enemies of mankind are at the gates, they won't be calling for the High Lords. They won't be quoting the Codex Astartes. They'll be howling for the wolves of Fenris. And by the Allfather, we'll answer, with fang and claw, with bolter and blade. Let the bureaucrats rule their empire of paper. We'll be here guarding the night, hunting in the dark. 200 years, 2 centuries of watching the Imperium my father built twist and warp into something unrecognizable, a beast of bureaucracy and blind faith, stumbling along on the crutch of my father's corpse light. I sat there surrounded by my sons, my wolves, all of them drunk on Jode and tales of glory long past. And then I saw it, a vision, clear as ice. The tree of life appeared before me, a wellspring of pure warp energy, hidden in the roiling madness of the Eye of Terror. I knew then what I had to do, what I'd always been meant to do. I called my wolf guard, my closest brothers, all but Bjorn. Someone had to keep the pack together after all. I'm leaving, I told them. Simple as that. No flowery speeches, no grand farewells. That's not the wolf way. I could see the questions in their eyes, the fear, the hope, but they didn't ask. They knew better. As we prepared to depart, I caught Bjorn's eye across the feast hall. He knew. Of course he knew. Always was the sharpest of my sons. I nodded to him, a silent promise. Keep them strong. Keep them true. Until I return. If I return. The journey ahead. It's not one I expect to survive. The Eye of Terror isn't kind to mortals. And for all our strength, that's what we are in the end. Mortals playing at godhood. But if there's even a chance, a sliver of hope that I can heal my father, restore the Imperium to what it should be, then it's worth it. worth any price. I know what they'll say when I'm gone. They'll spin tales, weave legends, the Wolf King off on some grand quest. They'll hunt for me, scour the galaxy for any trace. Let the myth grow. And who knows, maybe I'll make it back for that final battle they're all so keen on. The wolf time, it has a nice ring to it, I'll admit. But if I don't, if this is truly the last time I'll walk the halls of the Fang, breathe the icy air of Fenris, there are worse ways for a wolf to go out than hunting the biggest prey of all. To my sons, my wolves, stay strong, stay true. Remember who you are and where you came from. To the Imperium, I'm sorry. I tried. We all did. And to you, Father, if you can still hear me, hold on. Your executioner's coming. One last time. For Fenris. For the All-Father. For humanity. Let the hunt begin.